Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for coming out on such a beautiful Washington afternoon at the end of a very eventful historic week. Welcome to an appeal of reason, to reason. This event is brought to you by the Goethe Institute, Washington, the Thomas Mann House, Los Angeles, in close cooperation with the University of Southern California, Capitol Campus. Thank you very much, UC, for hosting us. And of course, it's supported by the Federal Foreign Office, the Friends of Goethe Institute, and ASL. My name is Klaus Krischak. I'm the Regional Director of the Network of Goethe Institutes in North America. It's a pleasure to see you all here. Why are we here? Obviously, we're celebrating Thomas Mann's 150th birthday this year. We're celebrating Thomas Mann's 150th birthday pretty much at all 150 Goethe institutes worldwide. Coincidence. We're celebrating the master of sweeping, epic, and timeless stories, the author of The Magic Mountain. I've actually read it twice as a young man, and much later on. Highly recommend that. The author of Dr. Faustus. Okay, I admit I gave up at page 500. If there is a literary therapist in this house, please talk to me, because it's a trauma that I have still not quite worked on. I'll talk to you afterwards. Excellent. So we're celebrating an author, but in this day and age, and with an event called An Appeal to Reason, we're celebrating the political artist Thomas Mann today and here in Washington. His Deutsche Ansprache, Appell an die Vernunft, or Appeal to Reason, was given in Berlin in the Beethoven Saal very shortly after a massive election gain in Germany's Nazi Party, by Germany's Nazi Party, which, as you all know, a mere 3 years or less than 3 years after the event, came to power. And we all know the consequences of what that had, and we commemorated the end of World War II this week. During his address, Thomas Mann said the following, and I quote, "And yet there are hours, moments of our common life, when art fails to justify itself in practice, when the inner urgency of the artist fails him, when the more immediate necessity of our existence chokes back thought, when the general distress and the crisis shake him too, in such a way that what we call art, the happy and impassionate preoccupation with eternally human values, comes to seem idle, ephemeral, a superfluous thing, and a mental impossibility." Mann initially saw himself as an unpolitical writer. This event in 1930, the appeal and everything that followed in his personal and artistic life, is testimony to the fact that artists need to play a political role, that art indeed is political. In trying times, when eternally human values are at stake, art cannot remain a merely aesthetic venture. I come too close, don't worry. The Goethe Institute is Germany's official cultural institute abroad, 150 places worldwide. Cultural and artistic exchange, open dialogue, knowledge about the other is at the heart of what we do, and we're passionate about that. We live in trying times again, here in the US, in Germany, in Europe, and across the globe. I'm quite sure Thomas Mann, would agree if I said that knowledge, dialogue, and exchange between nations is more important today than probably at any time since the fall of the Iron Curtain, the end of the Cold War. I wish you all a pleasant, inspiring, and hopefully also fun afternoon with lots of connections, with lots of more information. There's a beautiful lineup of speakers and artists. But I will pass the baton now to my friend and colleague, Dr. Oliver Hartmann from the Thomas Mann House, Los Angeles. Right, come on. Welcome to Washington, Oliver.
Thank you, dear Klaus. I think it's the first time that we share the same stage and microphone after all these years. Well, good afternoon and a very warm welcome here at the USC Capitol campus. It's great to be here, and we are so excited to seeing so many familiar faces in the audience and new faces to celebrate democracy, freedom, and culture, commemorating the 105th birthday of writer and Nobel-laureate Thomas Mann. In the next hours, we would like to explore his enduring legacy and its relevance to the challenges that global democracies, freedom of expression, and the power of literature are facing today. So let's all celebrate this together and appeal to a reason. As Klaus said, my name is Oliver Hartmann, and I'm the director of the Thomas Mann House. And we are a residency center and space for transatlantic debates located in the former exile home in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles, where Thomas Mann and his family used to live between 1942 and 1952 after fleeing Nazi Germany. Similar to the Goethe Institute, the Thomas Mann House is a non-profit organization supported by the German government. And together with my small team, we run a fellowship and residency program. So every year we invite around 15 outstanding personalities and public intellectuals from Germany to stay and live at the Thomas Mann House and to engage with other scholars, artists, and community organizers from Los Angeles, California, and the United States. In our programs, we organize various public events and online series, such as our podcast and video program, 55 Voices for Democracy, and events like we do it today. It is part of our mission to address contemporary and future issues related to art, politics, society, and culture. And we do this in the spirit of Thomas Mann, who during his time in California and the United States dealt extensively in his writings and lectures with the vulnerability of democracies, democratic renewal, the rise of fascism, the freedom of the arts, migration, exile, and others, certainly all topics that are more relevant than ever. Well, many of you have probably heard about the devastating wildfires in early January this year that destroyed large parts of Altadena and Pacific Palisades. And during these wildfires, also the Thomas Mann House was in the danger zone. We had to evacuate our resident fellows, parts of our team members, some important cultural goods and artworks. Luckily, no major damage or loss happened to us, though some of our neighbors and friends have lost their entire homes, memories, and belongings. In some parts of the city of Los Angeles, nothing is back to normal, and it still looks like a war zone, while in other parts, people carry out business as usual. At the Thomas Mann House, we were very fortunate that our house didn't burn at all, and we are deeply grateful to all the support and solidarity that we received from individuals and partners, such as the University of Southern California, the Goethe Institute, and also the Vendor Museum of the Cold War. Even today, we are still dealing with some smoke damage, cleaning, and maintenance procedures, you can imagine, but we hope to resume our residency program next month. And most likely, we will start off with a music program and a performative reading of Dr. Faustus. So Klaus, this is your chance again, maybe to read this book and give it another try. Not to mention actually that Thomas Mann wrote this book in the house in Pacific Palisades, and we still have the original piano where he sat and discussed with German philosopher and musicologist Theodor Adorno while writing on the novel and discussing the 12-tone music theory with him. So whenever you have a chance, please visit us in Los Angeles. But now back to the here and now. Together with the Goethe Institute in Washington, namely Andrea Zell and Teddy Rogers, my colleague Clara Tang and Benno Herz, we have curated a thrilling program for you today that somehow intertwines scholarly excellence, public discourse, and artistic interventions. So what can you expect today? Let me briefly introduce you what will happen in our two parts of today's event. So we will take Thomas Mann's as a historic reference and historic point of departure. We have invited Mann expert and literary scholar Hans-Rudolf Vaget to illuminate Mann's life, work, and his connection to Washington, D.C., and to the Library of Congress in a short lecture. We will then hear selected passages from two of Thomas Mann's original speeches, but this time performed by DC actor Rainier Brown as a voice for democracy. It's going to be exciting, I can tell you. These two contributions somehow offer us some food for thought and will lead us to our first panel discussion, The Power of the Pen, with Summer Lopez and Kimberly Murto Emerson. That will somehow bring us to the present and shedding light on the vital relationship between literature and democratic principles. After this, I guess we all deserve a good coffee break to rest, digest, and also recharge our batteries with a strong coffee and some sweets over there. And also you should have a closer look at these flower sculptures by artist Adele Kenworthy. After the break, for the second part, we will open with a commissioned sound art composition by DC artist Kokai, which is an intriguing collage of sounds and quotes celebrating Thomas Mann's anniversary. And just a hint, once in a while throughout our program, you might already hear some movement here and there of this composition, so pay attention. Mentioning sound and hearing, it's also my great pleasure to welcome Faith Sanders and Chelsea Sampson, who will be interpreting today's spoken English into American Sign Language, ASL. Thank you, and also thanks to Pro Bono ASL for providing this ASL service to make our event more accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Last but not least, in our program, we will imagine a future where democracy will win. In the second panel conversation, Azar Nafisi and Daniel Zieblatt, together with Jeffrey Gedman, will dive deep into complex questions such as the citizen's role in defending democratic values or the subversive power of literature. If you make it until the end, then congratulations, you definitely qualify to join us for the reception at the end. We will gather on the 8th floor of this beautiful building. There's a penthouse and a rooftop terrace, and we will serve you some refreshments and delicious finger foods. And everyone is welcome, and you can take this chance to start your own conversation on democracy, freedom, and culture. Ultimately, and I'm nearly done, I promise, I would like to express my gratitude to our partners and co-presenters, the Goethe Institute, USC Libraries, the USC Dornsife Center for Advanced Genocide Research, our amazing teams at the East Coast and West Coast, and of course, Sidney Welle and Michael Kurzke, our event partners at USC Capitol Campus. It is truly a great experience and also a great continuation to collaborate with the University of Southern California, who is already one of our strong partners in Los Angeles back home, now here in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol Campus. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to a great librarian and exiled scholar, a regular visitor of the Hollywood Bowl, a dear friend and remarkable activist for animal rights, and the reason actually why I adopted a Doberman a year ago and became a proud dog daddy. Please welcome Michaela Ullmann, Head of Instruction and Assessment at the USC Libraries in Los Angeles.
Thank you so much, Oliver. I didn't expect the dog connection to come in here. On behalf of the USC Libraries, I join Oliver and Klaus in welcoming you to today's event. We're delighted to support this important program and to collaborate once again with our long-standing partners, the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles and the Goethe Institute. My name is Michaela Ullmann, and I serve as the Head of Instruction and Assessment, as well as the Feuchtwanger Projects Coordinator at the USC Libraries in Los Angeles. USC Libraries is proud to be home of the Feuchtwanger Memorial Library, which holds the largest archive of German-speaking exile materials on the West Coast, and possibly in the entire United States. Among these rich collections are the papers of Heinrich Mann from his early years in Los Angeles, including decades of correspondence between these two very different brothers. And while it's often claimed that Thomas Mann and Leon Feuchtwanger had a strained relationship, the correspondence between the two writers in our Leon Feuchtwanger papers tells a more nuanced story. The extensive correspondence between them reveals a shared fate, a mutual reverence for books, and a profound respect for one another. Thomas Mann and Leon Feuchtwanger also demonstrated a shared commitment to resisting Nazism, leveraging their international reputations, extensive readerships, and most powerful instrument of influence, the written word. The USC Library's Exile Studies collections offer a wealth of insight that resonate far beyond the field of exile studies. Scholars of literature, history, law, and social justice, as well as artists, journalists, and musicians from across the globe, have found in these archives a rich source of knowledge and inspiration. Yet what brings me personally the greatest joy is witnessing our students engage with the history of the German-speaking exiles, their experiences of displacement, trauma, and loss, as well as their resilience, activism, and enduring hope. Over the years, many classes have visited our special collections to work with these materials, and I've had the privilege of teaching seminars dedicated to this topic. Again and again, I see students draw parallels between the upheavals of the 1930s and 1940s and contemporary global and national challenges. They connect deeply with the personal stories of those who fled Nazi persecution and rebuilt their lives in exile, those who resisted through their writings, their music, public advocacy, and by simply surviving. The courage, perseverance, and creativity of the German-speaking exiles continue to serve as a source of strength and inspiration for our students, and for everyone who learns about their stories. The UC Library's commitment to preserving exile literature and making it accessible not only safeguards history, but also empowers current and future generations to learn from it. Historically, libraries have been so much more than simply repositories of books. They serve and have always served as sanctuaries of thought, memory, and democratic access to knowledge. From ancient times on and through eras of conflict, migration, war, and change, libraries have served as a constant, present, and safe space. Libraries have not just preserved the history of those privileged by life, they have also strived to preserve the intellectual and cultural heritage of minorities and of displaced communities, including that of the German-speaking exiles. Today, in a world marked by political polarization, disinformation, and renewed threats to freedom of expression, libraries, and most importantly, the librarians and library staff working there, continue to play an essential role. They provide space for critical inquiry, historical reflection, and inclusive dialogue, functions that are more vital than ever. Allow me to add a brief personal note here before I introduce our first two speakers. Libraries and what goes on within them often goes unnoticed by the public and rarely makes the news. This March, the National Archivist was removed from her position, and an executive order was signed to dismantle the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And just 2 days ago, the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, was removed from her position. I encourage and urge you to pay attention to these developments and to support your local libraries and archives and librarians and archivists. Let me get back to my original script now. Among the many inspiring contributions of the German-speaking exiles are the lectures Thomas Mann delivered during his tenure as consultant in Germanic literature at the Library of Congress. And so I'm very much looking forward to our first presentation of the day, Thomas Mann at the Library of Congress, presented by our distinguished speaker, Professor Hans Rudolf Vaget. Hans Rudolf Vaget is Professor of German Studies and Comparative Literature at Smith's College. He received his academic training at the Universities of Munich and Tübingen, the University of Wales at Cardiff, and at Columbia University in New York. His research focuses on Goethe, Wagner, and Thomas Mann, on which he has published extensively. He published Wehvolles Erbe, Richard Wagner in Deutschland, Hitler, Knappertsbusch, Mann. He's also author of the seminal book Thomas Mann, der Amerikaner, Leben und Werk im amerikanischen Exil, published by S.Fischer Publishing House. After Hans Rudolf Vaget's presentation, Rainier Brown will perform a recital of excerpts from Thomas Mann's speeches, Listen Germany, and the upcoming victory of democracy. Rainier S. Brown is a Helen Hayes Award-winning actor in DC. She has appeared at the Shakespeare Theatre Company, Arena Stage, the Folger Shakespeare Theatre, Chesapeake Shakespeare Theatre, Roundhouse Theatre, and more. You can watch Rainier on Law & Order and Godfather of Harlem on MGM+, or see her work in the world premiere of The American Five as Coretta Scott King at Ford's Theatre this fall. But first, now please help me welcome Hans Rudolf Vaget to the podium.
Thank you, Michaela, for your kind words. Let me say something that should be obvious. It's a great honor for me to kick off this event and try to shed some light on an episode in Thomas Mann's life that is not as well known as it deserves to be, namely his association with the Library of Congress. All the more so since the library is again in the news, and not in a very edifying manner. Ladies and gentlemen, in the fall of 1938, can I be heard in the back? In the fall of 1938, as the dark clouds of war gathered over Europe, Thomas Mann, the German Nobel Prize laureate of 1929, left Switzerland, his first country of exile, and moved to the United States. After a brief stint as lecturer at Princeton University, he settled in Los Angeles. There, in 1942, he built himself a comfortable house in which he hoped to complete his life's work. Together with his American citizenship, which he acquired in 1944, the house in Pacific Palisades signaled his firm intention to remain in America for good. It did not quite turn out that way. Mann left the country in 1952 for reasons eerily similar to those that brought him to these shores in the first place. He returned to Switzerland, and there he died as an American citizen in 1955. In 2016, the Federal Republic of Germany obtained Mann's former property in California to maintain it as a residency for intellectuals and artists. The Thomas Mann House now serves as a splendid reminder of a memorable moment in German-American relations when this country became the haven for refugees from fascism. An even more potent reminder of that historical moment is the Library of Congress, where in 1941 Mann was appointed as a consultant in Germanic literature. In that capacity, between 1942 and 1949, he delivered 5 lectures offering unflinching thoughts on the war and on issues of intellectual history, ranging from Nietzsche and Goethe to his own work. Among the 5 addresses, Germany and the Germans stands out. This lecture was given on May 29, 1945, a mere 3 weeks after the end of the war in Europe. Here, Mann addresses the question that was on everybody's mind: what caused Germany to embrace fascism and dictatorship? Mann's own take on the matter is noteworthy for 2 reasons. He looks farther into the past than most historians, and he concedes that he himself and his work are implicated in the story of Germany's descent into barbarism. Ever since Buddenbrooks, his first novel, published in 1901, Mann was widely viewed as the supreme chronicler of the German soul. As such, in his 1945 speech, he does not content himself with pointing to the usual suspects, such as the world economic crisis and the Versailles treaties. Rather, drawing a lesson from his own political learning process, he focuses on homegrown factors, zeroing in on German Romanticism and its underlying culture of Innerlichkeit. He argues that the culture of inwardness proved to be a deeply ambivalent blessing with unforeseen political consequences. On the one hand, Innerlichkeit fostered classical music, the universally most esteemed achievement of German culture. On the other hand, it gave its adherents the license to neglect politics and to ignore their own responsibility for the political welfare of the state. Here, Mann also lets go of the notion, dear to all opponents of Hitler, the belief that there are two Germanys, a good and a noble one, and an evil and guilty one. Mann had come to realize that there's only one Germany, a country, quote, whose best turned into evil, adding, "It is all within me, I have been through it all." Indeed, the extent to which he himself had been through it all becomes apparent in Dr. Faustus, his unsparing novel of 1947 about the fateful concatenation of German music and German history. Mann's inaugural lecture at the Library of Congress took place on November 17, 1942, and turned out to be an altogether brilliant affair. His topic on that occasion was the theme of the Joseph novels, the four novels, that is, in which Mann undertakes a sophisticated retelling of the biblical story of Joseph in light of modern psychology. Gathered at the library's Coolidge Auditorium to honor Mann were members of Congress, the Supreme Court, the diplomatic corps, and the press, chosen from the A-list of the American capital. The person who set up the event, in the fullest sense of the term, was Agnes Meyer, Mann's formidable American fan. Agnes and her husband Eugene Meyer, the financier, were the owners of the Washington Post. This made her a well-connected Washington insider with the power and the means to make things happen. Born in New York City, to third-generation immigrants from northern Germany, Agnes attended Barnard College and became a journalist. Her background and education nourished a lifelong interest in the arts and in artists. She introduced herself to Mann during his brief visit to New York in 1937. The following year, she read Joseph in Egypt, which proved to be a life-changing experience. She resolved to support Thomas Mann, clear all obstacles in his way, and write a book about him to deepen America's appreciation of his work. For starters, she persuaded Princeton University to offer Mann a temporary lectureship. More importantly, she engineered his appointment at the Library of Congress. She was able to do this as a member of the board of the Library of Congress Trust Fund and as a trustee of the Eugene and Agnes Meyer Foundation. It helped, of course, that she was on friendly terms with Archibald MacLeish, the Librarian of Congress, who was likewise eager to have Mann's name associated with the library. Agnes Meyer's biggest coup in setting up her protégé's inaugural lecture was to get the Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace, to introduce the speaker of the evening. No such honor had ever been bestowed on him in Germany. Mr. Wallace seized the opportunity to salute and to honor not just Thomas Mann, but, in fact, all refugees from fascism. Referring to the biblical parable of the stone that was rejected by the builders, but through the Lord's doing became the indispensable cornerstone of the entire building, the Vice President elaborated, "In recent years, particularly, those who have been rejected in their homeland have come to this land, which we believe to be the chosen land. They might not be recognized immediately as future cornerstones, but I would not be surprised if 50 years hence, many people of this chosen land did not look back to the period of the 30s and 40s and say, At that time, there came an enriching of the thought and ideals of the United States, which ushered in a new and more fruitful era. Try to imagine hearing this today. Mr. Wallace proceeded to characterize Mann as a great artist and Democrat, and as the model of a politically engaged writer. He cites specifically the courage Mann demonstrated in 1936 as the Spanish Civil War unfolded, when he, quote, resolutely spoke out for Republican Spain. Wallace was referring to one of Mann's passionate anti-fascist essays entitled I Stand with the Spanish People, that had just appeared in the collection of his political essays and speeches published by Alfred Knopf under the title of Order of the Day. Mann hated Francisco Franco for overthrowing the Spanish Republic as much as he hated Hitler for overthrowing the Weimar Republic. Foremost among his convictions was his firm opposition to the policy of non-intervention and isolationism. This led him to denounce what he called the shameful connivance at a fascistic insurrection by the governing clique of the great powers. Dismayed by the refusal of the Western democracy to stop fascism in Spain, he argued that their failure paved the way to Munich. The reference is to the infamous conference convoked in September of 1938 in Munich, at which France and Britain agreed to meet Hitler's demand that Czechoslovakia cede to him the Sudetenland, the German-speaking part of the country. This was agreed to in the name of peace in our time and in flagrant disregard of the international order established after World War I and of Czechoslovakia's sovereignty. France and Britain, lacking foresight and courage, chose to feed Hitler's insatiable hunger for territorial expansion, thereby encouraging it. Half a year after the Munich conference, the German dictator invaded Czechoslovakia and dismembered it. Another 6 months further down the road to Nazi rule in Europe, he invaded and dismembered Poland. That finally moved Britain and France to declare war. Let us remember here that the Czechoslovak Republic, created in 1919 from the territories of the defeated Austro-Hungarian Empire and situated in the heart of Europe, was a model democracy. What's more, in 1936, it had granted Mann citizenship when he found himself without a passport. To him, the shabby betrayal of Czechoslovakia by France and England turned into the second political trauma of his life, following the takeover of Germany by the Nazis in 1933. Had Mr. Wallace had the time, he might well have commented on two other pieces in Mann's book of political essays. One, entitled This Peace, was written in reaction to the Munich Agreement of September 1938. Suspecting that French and English sympathies with Hitler were rooted in the hope that fascism would serve as a bulwark against communism. This piece, the essay, This Peace, brims with barely contained anger at France and Great Britain. In November of 1939, a year later, and 2 months into the war, Mann wrote a follow-up entitled This War, in which he performed a complete turnaround in his attitude toward England. Now that Great Britain was at war with Germany, all his anti-British grievances were forgotten and forgiven. He signaled to England his solidarity and predicted that the Brits would prevail in their fight against Hitler. Circumstantial evidence strongly suggests that this war was covertly prompted by the BBC, which was building a German program to counter Nazi propaganda. Apparently, the BBC deemed Mann's essay, This War, sufficiently pro-British for them to decide to take him on as a propagandist for the Allied cause. Beginning in October of 1940 and continuing until the end of the war, Mann wrote and recorded a total of 58 messages addressed to his former compatriots. Taken together, they represent his weightiest contribution to the war effort. In these 8-minute addresses, he blasts the Nazi regime for its pervasive mendaciousness and criminality, for its enslavement of neighboring countries, and for its attempt to destroy the Jewish population of Europe. He never tires of hurling invectives at the Führer in the hope of disabusing his followers of the foolish notion that he was Germany's savior. Mann exhorts the Germans to rise and to rid the country of the Nazi regime. Only slowly did he realize that in a dictatorship, insurrection was practically impossible, and that liberation had to come from outside. Thus, he adjusted his appeals, giving his messages, broadly speaking, a more pedagogical character. He did so by showing the Germans a way back into the family of civilized nations. Paramount in that endeavor was the moral obligation to acknowledge the crimes that had been committed in the name of Germany. To become cognizant of the full extent of the horrors, a tremendous effort was going to be needed to expose those crimes and to enlighten the survivors of the war, as well as future generations. What Mann called for as early as January 1945, before the end of the war, was a form of Holocaust research long before the term became current and long before such research was undertaken. Considering Mann's deep, almost cultish admiration for Franklin Roosevelt, we may assume that he probably would have preferred to fight on the American side. However, before Pearl Harbor, the president's hands were tied by the Neutrality Act, passed by Congress and repeatedly reinforced. Despite of this, Mann's decision to join the war of the airwaves rested on the firm belief that Roosevelt was adamantly opposed to Hitler and to fascism. He claimed that after his first encounter with FDR in June of 1935, he felt certain that Hitler's fate was sealed. It is revealing of Mann's need for legitimation, if not for a blessing, that he sought and was granted a second visit to the White House. It took place in January of 1941. Simply experiencing the presence of the American president evidently strengthened his resolve as a participant in the war. It gave him the confidence to declare in a letter to Agnes Meyer, "Je fais la guerre." But his American benefactor was not a fan of FDR and would have liked to see her protégé abstain from politics altogether. Mann would have none of it and decided to spell it out for her in no uncertain terms. This war, he wrote to her right after seeing the president, this war is a decisive battle of mankind, and everything will be decided in it, including the fate of my life's work. He added that he wanted National Socialism to be destroyed and Hitler with it, and that it was his most ardent wish to live to see it happen. Mann's imaginary brotherhood in arms with the American president is key to understanding why the death of Franklin Roosevelt on April 12, 1945, caused the kind of rupture in his relationship to America that it did. Not immediately, but over time and with increasing force. Mann never took to FDR's successor, Harry Truman. In the election of 1948, he supported Henry Wallace and Wallace's new Progressive Party. He believed that by reorienting American policy from anti-fascism to anti-communism, Truman was ruining Roosevelt's political legacy. His love of America was further soured in 1949 when he was pilloried in Life magazine as a communist dupe. A particularly painful blow was dealt to him in March of 1950 when his appointment at the Library of Congress was in effect terminated. Luther Evans, the new librarian, saw fit to cancel Mann's next lecture, referring obliquely to, quote, abnormal tensions and unusual sensitivities which surround our days. Actually, the FBI had shown him a dossier concerning Mann's visit the previous year to Weimar in the communist part of Germany. That alone made it seem advisable to silence their troublesome consultant. Sadly, Mann came to the conclusion that the land that had facilitated his fight against fascism had itself become fascist. The story of Thomas Mann and Washington does not end here. In a long letter to Agnes Meyer, written in February of 1955 and filled with premonitions of death, he once again expresses his profound gratitude for the diligence and affection with which she had immersed herself in his work. He encourages her to include in her papers, which the Library of Congress was about to acquire, the chapters and fragments of her own ambitious but uncompleted study of his work. With a chuckle, he added that some future doctoral candidates, of whom there would be undoubtedly be many, might benefit from them. He also agreed that their own voluminous correspondence should be preserved by the library, at least in part. Finally, he singled out Archibald MacLeish, telling her, "I was always proud of this man's warm feelings towards me. He seemed to me to represent the best America." Thus, the occasionally stormy relationship that Thomas Mann had maintained with Agnes Meyer from 1937 to 1955, and by extension with Washington and with the Library of Congress, ended on a soft note of gratitude, conciliation, and love. There exists yet another token of Mann's bond with the library, and a very valuable one at that. I'm referring to the manuscript of Das Gesetz, Mann's fantasy about Moses, known in English as the Tables of the Law. Writing this brilliant late tale, Mann used the official stationery of the Library of Congress. Donating his manuscript to the institution that had bestowed upon him one of the greatest honors of his life seemed to be the right thing to do. I thank you for your attention.